Hello, and a huge welcome to BLOXHUB and BLOXHUB Debates. How do we create an inclusive and socially responsible circular economy? That is what we are addressing today. The whole series of this autumn event series in designing the Irresistible Circular Society is asking the questions: how do we ensure a sustainable future? How will our buildings and cities be created, and by whom? Which values and materials will characterize the society of today and tomorrow? That's what we are actually addressing in this series of 8 events of science talks and debates. I could not do this without an amazing group of partners. So I say thank you. I say thank you to ARUP, 3XN, Linear Group, the Royal Danish Academy, Build Aalborg University, and Danish Design Center. And today I am so fortunate to have the program director, Moeskær from Danish Design Center, that I will give the word to in a second, because Monika will actually moderate today's debate. But before we get started, I just want to let you know a little bit about BLOXHUB. For those of you who've heard this before, I apologize, I'll be quick. But for those of you who are with us for the first time, it might be nice to know a little bit about us. We were founded in 2018 as an initiative created, established and funded by Realdania, Copenhagen Municipality, and the Ministry of Business and Industry. We were an initiative designed and established to create a space where collaboration and partnerships between companies, organizations, researchers and practitioners can meet, emerge and drive change to enhance sustainability, sustainable urbanization. We're about 700 research institutions, organizations and companies who share our lives in BLOXHUB on a daily basis, either as residents or members. The thriving community can be seen in new research projects, networks forming, partnerships emerging, and new product development. The partnership as we present behind this series is also a testament to what we strive to create and enhance in our community. We believe the new solutions to sustainable urban development come from consilience and collaborations. So a huge welcome to those of you who are with us today physically and those of you who are with us virtually. I can only encourage those of you in the room with me and Monika and the panel, and also those of you with us virtually, to ask questions. You're able to ask questions if you're with us virtually in the YouTube. There's a chat function. And I have a colleague and myself will be curating the chat today. So thank you so much for joining us. And now, Monika, I'm going to leave the debate in your capable hands. And thank you so very much for being with me here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pernille. And hello and welcome, everyone. It's great to be here. And I'm really happy to be the one to lead us through this afternoon's debate with a fantastic lineup of a panel, and with a very timely and important topic. So yeah, as Pernille said, I'm a program director at the Danish Design Center, and together with Build Aalborg University, we have planned today's debate. So just a short intro, because what are we actually discussing? Pernille showed the title and it's like did the headline, but what does it actually mean? So creating a circular economy has almost exclusively focused on the economic and environmental gains, while the social impact have barely been considered beyond the issue of job creation. So creating a more circular economy can create new source of inequality in the world if we are not aware. So the question is, how do we secure a circular transition that meets the needs of all and together within the means of our planet? So for the next hour, we will dive into this question and we will look into how circular transformation from this perspective of social justice, social inclusions in terms of distribution of wealth, opportunities, and also the privilege within this society. So to help us to give insights on these important perspectives and the social aspect in circular economy, we have five panelists joining us today from all over the world. And therefore, most of them are on and are with us online. And you see the panel here. So, but here in Blocks, let's start with you, Karoline. Here in Blocks with us in Copenhagen, we have you, Karoline Liedtke-Sørensen, head of landscape at COBE Architects. And joining us online, we have Rebecca Clube, interdisciplinary PhD researcher at the Center for Environmental Policy at Imperial College London. And Frenzi, junior researcher and circular specialist at Metabolic in the Netherlands. And Siddharth Hande, CEO and founder of Kabadiwalla Connect and social entrepreneur, joining us from India. And then we have Salomé, Galjaard, strategist for circular economy and sustainability in the city of Amsterdam. Welcome all of you. It's such a pleasure to have you here. So we'll start with the first heat of the debate, I like to call it. So looking into what is important in terms of social inclusion in regards to circularity. So first, we would like to hear from you, Frenzi. In Metabolic, your focus is within circular economy is within the social ecological well-being, which is activated in various of European research projects that you are involved in. And let me just quote a little bit from your website, because as you say, many people think that circular economy is about cycling materials through the economy. But there's so much more to consider. We need a system that offers benefits for biodiversity, energy, water, well-being, society, and culture. And what's more, something that provides advantages in one aspect shouldn't shift burdens elsewhere. So therefore, you have actually developed this 7-pillar model where you look into or you present an approach to a more holistic approach to circular economy. Could you please elaborate a bit and explain us the 7 pillars model and how it balances the focus on circularity and the social aspects and values?
Yes, thank you so much, Monica. What a great introduction. Metabolic developed this framework, not me personally, but I'm very happy to give some insights on this. You can all hear me well, right? Just making sure. Perfect. So the 7 pillars is somehow our internal compass that we use in our projects. We are doing a lot of advisory work and research work for both cities, but also businesses and corporations. And we have developed these 7 pillars to avoid, as you already said, burden shifting and unintended consequences across those domains that you are seeing here on that. I just want to say, like, there are some of the more obvious burden shifting that we can think of, right? So we have, for example, energy and water. It's kind of impossible to imagine a circular system which is driven by fossil fuels. Or it is impossible to imagine a circular system in which our materials are actually toxic and harm human well-being, or water for that matter. But what I want to talk about today a little bit more is give you a few examples of the social and value aspects. And I thought it's best done by a few thought experiments of how a circular economy would kind of look like if we just focused on materials. And I'm starting off with this idea of social inclusion. And we can just envision for a moment a future and we have achieved that when we used a product or a material, we sent back the product to the company who created it. They can capture the value out of it and turn it into a new product and then resell it again, right? And that's all fine. But what we need to really acknowledge is that there are winners and losers in this, and there's a lot of infrastructure, technology, and capacity that organizations have to create a circular system like that. Some companies can't even really achieve the scale, for example, to create a take-back system. They don't have the expertise or the tech to track their materials, to know what's in their materials. So in the end, there will be some winners and losers. And the way we think about it is, from a social inclusion perspective, is that we cannot really create a circular material system if the monetary flows are still linear, for example. So we really need to ensure that also money or the economic well-being circulates and cascades throughout society so that everyone has the chance to kind of reap the benefits and capture the value that is hidden within material flows. So that's one of the first kind of social inclusion aspects of a circular economy. Coming to your point of values, which is also another really important pillar that we are trying to integrate in our projects. I just want to start with this idea that a circular economy can really exist fully is kind of wrong. That's just laws of physics, right? We always have losses. Recycling will never really be the answer to everything. So what we need to do is prioritize. In a finite world, we need to kind of think beyond the monetary value that a product can have. We can create maybe a technological gadget that is fully circular, but is that really creating the value, societal, cultural, emotional, that we want to spend our resources on? So this is just, I think, a nice example. We need to prioritize in a finite world, and that's why values really matter. So these are just two ways to illustrate how we are using the 7 pillars to kind of look at trade-offs and find out how we can minimize them between each other.
Thank you so much, Frenzi. Very important word, prioritize. So could you please also maybe elaborate a bit more on how you're working actively in some of the European projects that we also collaborate on? With how do you work with the social aspect within the circularity? Can you mention an example or a case from there?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I am personally most involved in a project called Centrino that the Danish Design Center is also part of. And Centrino is a project funded by the EU in which we are looking at how to regenerate urban industrial sites, so former industrial districts, with social inclusion and the circular economy in mind. And what we're really trying to do here is to look at small-scale makers, craftsmen, manufacturers in cities, and how these are usually kind of the losers of regeneration projects, right? So they're pushed out, there's gentrification, and industry is kind of leaving the cities. And what we're trying to do is build a model in which we are not pushing them out, but understand of how they can kind of onboard the circular economy train and be kind of retrained, and also not only retrained, but also leverage what they already know within a circular concept of a city. So it's really showcasing that a vision of a circular city relies on a lot of these skills, vocationally trained professionals and makers that we already have, but that currently don't really profit from the narrative. So in Centrino, what we're trying to do is, first of all, map out the resources that these agents have in a city. This can be existing repair skills, existing infrastructure, and so on, and thereby showing how we can create synergies and industrial symbiosis between them, and then tell cities ultimately that we need these people and these jobs in cities to achieve the circularity goals that we have. And yeah, that's one of the biggest examples for us of how we try to build really the vision of a circular economy in which everyone has a role to play, and in which the concept or the narrative isn't really appropriated by big companies only.
Thank you so much, Frenzi. That was a really good example and a very good point to actually be on training what we already know and learn how to do things differently. And with that, I will move on to you, Salomé, from City of Amsterdam, because that's actually what you've been experimenting with and working on. So the City of Amsterdam is a front runner in sustainability and circular thinking. And you have, as a city, published your circular strategy for 2020 to 2025. And here you also outline that that you see a new perspective, a local economy. You see the local economy from a new perspective, and that you have actually shifted the focus to be much more focused on local production, on processes and consumption. And the city aims to both significantly reduce its environmental footprint and also make Amsterdam thrive. So you have two overall goals. That first, you want to have the use of primary resource materials by 2030, and then you aim to become 100% circular, as a 100% circular city by the year of 2050. So to do this, you've been working very intensively also with Kate Raworth on the donut model as a strategic framework. So Salomé, you're a strategist for circular economy and sustainability in the City of Amsterdam, and you've been a very active part in driving this work and dialogue with Kate. Could you please tell us more about how you've been working with Kate and the donut model in Amsterdam?
Yes, of course, Monica, thank you. As you mentioned, the donut portrait that was made of Amsterdam by Kate was sort of presented to us at the same time that we finished our circular strategy, as you mentioned, that runs up to 2025. So hopefully we're on our way by then to becoming at least 50% circular in 2030. But what we realized is that if you just focus on let's say, material and technocratic solutions. I think Frenzi also referred to that just now. We're not going to make the city or the world a better place per se. So we believe that the challenges we as Amsterdam face, but this is a much bigger topic globally, of course, you cannot just achieve by focusing on material circular solutions. So we said, let's use the donut more or less, initially at least, as an underlayer, as a constant reminder that whenever we try to come up with sustainable solutions, we also have to keep the social aspect in mind and see if we can come up with better, richer, and more holistic solutions where we don't just look at a part of the challenge, but try to tackle the challenge as a whole. And so the donut portrait was handed to us. We were not quite sure how to deal with this challenge because it's a huge challenge. I'm not sure if a place can ever say that they're fully in the sweet spot of the donut, right in between the ecological ceiling, so what our earth can manage, and above the social level where we make sure that everyone has the means to live a complete life without too much stress and difficulties. So in between that ecological ceiling and that social foundation, we want to be. And we don't want to be there in Amsterdam only. We want everyone to be able to live in that sweet spot. And that's why the donut initially at least was so directly linked to our circularity program, because circularity is all about consumption. It's all about materials. But we can easily say that most of the products we consume in Amsterdam are not produced here. The materials are not mined here and the products are not created here. They're created somewhere else where the mining has impact and the production also influences people's lives. So I would say that we use the donut in two different ways to make Amsterdam a better place, but also to have a positive impact internationally by our local consumption. It has been a real challenge. If you start thinking about it, it's almost very confusing, and we know there is so much more work to do. But in practice, when you talk to people about the big idea behind it, it's so easy to understand and it's so appealing because everyone feels like we should stay underneath that ecological ceiling and above that social foundation. And that counts for everyone. So while the challenge itself is enormous and very challenging, the idea behind it is fantastic to bring people to the table and to at least start collaboratively to try to tackle these challenges we stand for. So it's a wonderful idea and a wonderful goal. And there are many different ways of implementing it. I'm happy to share a few, but this is at least what we're trying to do in Amsterdam.
Thank you so much, Salomé. It's very interesting to hear, and what an ambitious, way to work, and what an ambitious goal to have. And we would actually like to hear a few examples, or a good example on how you are, like, how does it look like in practice? So yeah, please elaborate a bit on that.
Let me start off by saying that these donut projects, they're not new. So if you start looking through these donut lenses at projects that are sustainable and social, obviously they've been around forever. Otherwise, we would not, as a city, be such a nice place to live in, I think. But it's really a means to push the boundaries a little bit. And what was interesting is that around the time that we launched our circular strategy and the donut portal, that's exactly when COVID started. And that forced us to do all these different projects that we did not foresee in the time leading up plans. And it's actually resulted in some wonderful donuts, you could say, related projects. So one I would love to highlight is a project that we called Everyone Connected, because everyone was forced to work from home and to go to school from home, or at least stay in their home. All of a sudden it became clear that not everyone was so easily digitally connected, whereas you could say that is more or less essential to today's life, that you have access to the online world and be able to communicate online. But all of a sudden it became clear that was not the case for everyone. So what we did, we set up a project where we took refurbished laptops and handed them out to, on the one hand, children going to school and not having laptops or other hardware to follow online classes, but also gave them to elderly people that were not interested in being online before, but now really needed to be in touch with their families or their friends, their social connections. So that was set up really, really quickly. And I understood later on that they didn't just hand out the refurbished laptops, and of course the refurbished part is where it's circular, and the handing out of laptops is where it has a more social focus. But it also came with a training on computer training and a training how to go about the online world for people that were not used to do that. So that was a great little project, and I now recently learned that this is going to be maintained. So there was not a one-off thing, but we're trying to get that embedded in the local policies so that everyone who does not have the means to be online will get the support from the government to do so, hopefully with refurbished laptops as well. And maybe another example on a much bigger scale is where our council member said, okay, but what happens when you try to bring a whole neighborhood into the donuts? Obviously, we don't know, but we just started off with our colleagues from all different departments from the city. We're looking at the southeast neighborhood in Amsterdam. We found that there's a lot of projects going on that would easily fit in the donut, but that there's also a lot of topics that are not really touched upon consciously, at least. But we also found that there's a lot of companies working or being in that area that are super keen to help move towards the donut. And obviously a very important target group is also the people living there and the people visiting that neighborhood. So slowly, step by step, we're trying to understand what a donut neighborhood is, who the stakeholders are, who the participants are, and what we need to do to move towards a donut neighborhood. So that's an ongoing process and fascinating to be involved in.
Thank you so much, Salomé, and very timely. You are ending on a note focusing in on like the circular neighborhoods. And now I would like to use that bridge to introduce you, Karoline. And so great to have you here also with us in the small studio. And so going from a city perspective and then to the neighborhood perspective, I'll just read a little bit about you and COBE. So as head of landscapes, you work with city nature, biodiversity and circularity in master planning of new areas, new cities, new neighborhoods, both in Copenhagen but also globally. And here to mention two examples also for the online audience, we can mention two neighborhoods here in Nordhavn as examples and Jernbanebyen, so like directly translated the railway city, and where city nature and local production are important keywords. So at COBE, you work both in Denmark and you work globally with large-scale planning projects, and you also work with, in your master plans to shaping the future of these upcoming neighborhoods. So I was thinking now, like hearing from Salomé also. So in your approach in COBE, how do you look into the different aspects of circularity, of biodiversity, of nature in your urban planning and in your master plan projects?
Yeah, thank you, Monica, and also thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to meet you also and such a diverse crowd here, and I already hear a lot of super interesting terms of ecological ceiling and social foundation. And I think what we're doing in our projects, we're also working maybe in this sweet zone, as you called it, Salomé. But as you also said, we are working nationally here in Denmark, but we're also working internationally. And this makes it extremely important for us to work context-based, also to always locally anchor our projects in their context. And this actually is something where we start by a lot of projects. Also, you named Jernbanebyen. We start actually first at looking at the landscape. And I'm also head of landscape at COBE, which has a little bit of this mediating role in the office. Just as the landscape also in the city is holding everything together, I'm always trying to hold everything together. And I'm always the starting point of a lot of projects. So we start actually first at looking what is, for example, the topography of an area. What can be found? Are there existing building, existing natural system? What plants and animals can be found? And also, are there social structures we have to react to? And also climate, microclimate, and macroclimate conditions. We have to scope with, and then we try to read ourselves into these conditions and reflect in our projects these conditions. And by this, as I said, we try to really ground the projects. And by this, these projects are then recognized and identified, and at the same time also, I think, valued. And this often creates in itself a sustainable moment, you can say. So when something is valued, it's going to be taken care of. People are taken care of. People feel that they belong. And then things last. And this is an extremely important aspect for our projects, to create things that last, and also to create something that gives something back, and which then leads me to the people and the stories. We always really try to think from a human perspective. As I said, we try to give something back in our projects, and this is where also the public space and the landscape, the city landscape, plays an extremely important role. And we try to think in different programs. When we, I'm mostly working in bigger scale projects, we really think also program in terms of like what is residential, what is commercial areas, what is working areas. I try to think in function of public spaces to offer a very big variety of different public spaces, so that everybody feels there is space for me and where I can go. And this, for example, then leads us to traffic, where we always try to find new traffic solutions that are not focused around the car, but more focused around again at the human, like the people walking, the people biking. And this then also leads me to economic issues, and then further to materials and also recycling and techniques. But maybe most important at the end is also a process. When we're thinking these big scale projects, we're always thinking projects that will be realized within the next 50 years. For example, you named Nordhavn. It's the Northern Harbor here in Copenhagen, and it's a project that we started in 2008. Now we have 21. And it's we have to think this project until 2050. At first, then the whole area is transformed and all the people are moved in. And it's very interesting to work with these processes, because they have to be resilient. They have to be. We have to make plans that can adapt to future changes, like climate is changing, but also societies are changing, social formations are changing, maybe families are changing, the way we live together are changing. But also the economy is changing, economy models are changing, and that's why we always try to develop plans that are not made as one big plan. We try, for example, in Nordhavn to develop a plan that works with different smaller districts that are developed one after the other, and they can then always reflect after one district is built. We can reflect, okay, what went well here, what didn't went so well, and then we can learn for the next area, and then we can change programs, say, okay, we need a little bit more residential areas here, we're missing a huge park here, and this makes us more flexible and the whole plan more flexible. And I think this is very important. And then we have also time to maybe include contemporary ideas, and to maybe also not maybe, but also include people after all phases of getting a feedback, feeling a little bit how's the atmosphere, what went well and what didn't went well. So to make a long story short, I think for COBE it's extremely important to work context based. And that we always put the existing local structures first, and instead of following a certain architectonical style, because that is something that is a little bit dangerous as architects and designers. You very much think in styles and looks, and we always try to think the context first. Yeah, I think.
Very nice. Thank you so much, Karoline. And also, I'm quite curious because also one question actually also for the production. So I'm quite sure that the online audience have seen the illustration of Jernbanebyen that you showed, but we haven't seen it here in the room. So just to let you know that it's been shown. But in terms of, for example, Jernbanebyen, could you mention like how have you thought of like elements of social inclusion, and how have you thought of those in regards to also the circularity and nature-based solutions, and how have you thought these things into this new area, new neighborhood?
Yeah, we did this on different levels. The beginning was, again, as I named before, the landscape, actually. We really did a very precise analysis of the plants and existing structures that are there. As you said, Jernbanebyen is translated as railway city, so it's an old railway yard or rail yard where the trains from all Denmark are driven in, and then they're going to be repaired, maintained, and then they go back into the train network. So it's a place that is really a place of labor, of work. Trains are repaired. It's a productive area. But this place is also getting smaller, and they're kind of putting the functions in a different place here in Denmark. So there's already a kind of, we call it train nature in the process of developing. So we started really to analyze this upcoming nature, the working structures, and by this at first defined green space concept that is holding the whole thing together and is offering for everybody moving there like a lot of green spaces with different qualities. Also, we have, for example, a place where a lot of old trees already can be found, and we transform this into a forest which is very dense and green and maybe more calm. And then we have a metro line going through the area, which is not under the earth, but an above metro line. And this is a very active area. Along this area, we already have a lot of young trees coming up. There are grasslands, open grasslands. So this area is very open and active, offering a lot of space for different activities, urban sports, and so on. And then we have another park, which has more this, which used to be an old allotment garden area. And there we take this idea of the history and transform it into a new gardenish park where you can rent your own garden lot, maybe have a common glass house. And then we have small squares also in the area where you can meet, and people from the outside also come and orientate. And I think this is very important, as I said before, to offer really a diversity of public functions and parks and different ways of experiencing nature. Some places are very natural, very dense, very lush, and other places are more urban stages like the squares. And then, as I named before, we have a very special move here at Jernbanebyen. We have something that we call the green net or the green voids, and this is actually the streets of Jernbanebyen are, thanks to our very ambitious client, streets that are car-free. So we don't have cars here. You park your cars at the periphery, and then you take your bike or your little løbehjul, how's it called? Your
like micro scooter.
Yeah, or there's also a bus route, like an automatic bus route going in. So you come to your flat on this smaller scale mobile traffic, and so the streets actually can become front yards for the people. So the streets are not longer something where you drive your car, park your car, and go to your flat. The streets is something where the neighborhood comes together, where you suddenly can have rainwater solutions for like handling rainwater, holding back rainwater. You can have space for green, you have space for bikes, of course, and of course also fire trucks and trash trucks. But it is more or less a total new category of public space that we're developing here, that is the front yard, or the street as the front yard for the neighborhood. And I think that I'm super excited to develop this further and do this. And in terms of local production, I think it's, as I said, Jernbanebyen has this history of being a place of labor, and we have really an amazing architectonical heritage. There are huge halls where the trains go in, so it's these dimensions I'm talking. And we thought, how can we keep this atmosphere, and how can we transform these halls? And also make Jernbanebyen a place where people go to work, create jobs, and have actually and keep these halls where you have small workshops, micro bruggery, you have galleries, but it's a working atmosphere there when you live on top. So, and I think this is something where we also really try to create an identity through this local production, and by this again a value also for people that go there from the outside but also live there.
Perfect. That sounds very familiar also to what you spoke into, Frenzi, that within like that local production and including all kinds of workforces and all kinds of people and backgrounds as well. So yeah. Maybe we'll get back to that later on. But thank you so much, Karoline. And very interesting to hear about Jernbanebyen. Personally looking forward to follow the project as well here in Copenhagen. So yeah, now we'll move on to what I call the next heat, the second heat of this debates. And here I would like to introduce the overall theme of this debate, of course, building on what we just heard. But we also talked about when planning this that a global transition is key. And now we've heard from some European participants here, and what we also discussed that in first world countries, we have the knowledge, and you also say that we have the knowledge, we have the technology, as well as the economical means to drive the circular transition. So we're quite privileged, actually. But what do we truly need to actually succeed with the circular transition? How do we actually make sure to involve everyone? How do we make sure to actually also involve developing countries? And that's what we would like to also discuss in this second heat. So I would like to introduce you, Rebecca. As a researcher, you have a specific focus on the social aspects of the circular economy, and you're focusing on a holistic and global approach in your research on circular transition. You have written in one of your research articles that social inclusion and the article that is titled "Social Inclusion and the Circular Economy: The Case of Fashion Textiles Manufacturer in Vietnam," where you argue that the societal and social inclusion has become a peripheral in the contemporary circular economy debate. I'm quite sure you will pronounce this much better than me, Rebecca. But it's all about fulfilling the human needs is a prerequisite for this sustainable development, as you argue. And instead of just looking into the economic values, you're also very focused on how the social aspect and how we will satisfy the need of a radical different way of looking into this. So please tell us more about your research and this article that I just mentioned.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I think probably that's a good explanation for my articles being far too wordy and using too many complex academic terms. But yeah, thank you very much for having me. My research, as you said, focuses on how we can ensure that a circular economy has positive social impacts. And although my research is at the micro level, so I look at individual entities and businesses, I always like to look at it in a global context. So one of my kind of concerns, I suppose, is that as we've heard from the other panelists, there's some really great initiatives going on around localization, which can have some really positive impacts. Particularly in the EU, there's policy to say that 700,000 new jobs will be created in the region. But what less is known is the impact on localization and localized production on developing regions. So what happens if we take these jobs from developing countries which have a reliance on them and move them closer to home? So there's definitely some positive impacts for Europe, but I'm kind of also interested in seeing that in a global context. So most of my research surrounds textiles in particular as kind of a case to explore. And in the textiles industry, there was recently a research article which suggested that the net benefit in terms of kind of socioeconomic benefits would be focused on Europe, whereas in fact a move to localization in the circular economy would have a net negative consequence on developing regions. So this is something I've kind of looked at within my research. Most recently, I've been exploring textiles manufacturing in Vietnam, and there's some really, really interesting cases coming out from there. And although they're not documented as much, there's lots of manufacturers who are doing some really great things in terms of circular strategies, reducing water use, really taking the forefront actually. So there's it kind of is positive, and then we can see there's actually learning to be done also from the developing countries back to the developed. And another kind of case, I guess, is that actually developing regions have been practicing circular economy practices for much longer than we have, or much more recently, I should say, than in Europe. So informal recycling economies in Egypt, in Colombia, in parts of Asia are really advanced, and actually perhaps they're better suited in a way to some of the behavioural changes that maybe Europe's a bit further from. In terms of the case you mentioned, so yes, I've been looking at this textiles manufacturing in Vietnam. And one of the really problematic areas in general in textiles is pre-consumer waste. So the waste that occurs during manufacturing, because textiles remains a very labour-intensive industry and thus prone to high wastage from human error. So this company I've been looking at, called Cytex, noticed two key problems, sustainable development problems in their kind of local economy. So they had this waste from their garment manufacturing, which they didn't want to incinerate or landfill, which is kind of the typical strategy employed in the industry. And they also know that Vietnam has a very high rate of disabled people. Up to 15% of the population is considered to have some sort of disability. So they thought, how can we take these two challenges and create a circular business? So using 600,000 pieces of pre-consumer waste, which they'd, I guess, thoughtfully stored for future purpose, they sought to create a business solely employing people from disadvantaged backgrounds and people with disabilities. So this company now has about 100 employees, making all sorts of amazing products, from clothing to homeware, out of this pre-consumer waste. And their ultimate aim, I guess, in partnership with some kind of international agencies like UNDP, is to integrate these workers into their larger manufacturing workforce. So essentially, I think it's a nice example of how a social challenge can be conscientiously considered whilst also coupling it with a circular economy strategy.
Okay, it's a very nice example indeed. Thank you so much. And I'm also curious that, because you also argue that circular economy can actually be both inclusive and commercially feasible, and which approaches do you think that we need to actually both explore and implement this even further?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, that's kind of a small scale example, and I kind of like in my research to find these kind of unusual deviant cases, because I think they're really good learning opportunities. And I think it's naive perhaps, which is often referenced in the literature, to make the assumption that there'll be a social benefit from circularity. I think it actually has to be more of a conscientious decision. And for businesses or policy, it really means looking at that system, identifying the pain points or the points where the intervention could be really like the highest intervention potential, and then kind of really thinking how the strategy can have the maximum social impact, because I think it can't be assumed that there'll be a positive impact. There's nothing actually to say that a circular economy has a better social outcome than a linear economy if it's not done conscientiously. So I think it's really kind of mapping it out, looking at these pain points and finding how you can have the greatest impact, whether that's you as a policy or practitioner. So I think, it has to be a conscientious decision rather than an assumed benefit.
That's a very great point. Thank you. And I think you're completely right that you need to do those very conscious decisions and decision making. So we also discussed when talking earlier, Rebecca, that we also, including everyone and having a socially inclusive circular economy also includes getting citizens on board. And there is actually quite a lack of citizen engagement, as we also show in some of your other research. So what are your what are your proposals or ideas for engaging consumers to take more action? What would you suggest here? What do you have? What do you find in your research?
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting one. I could discuss this for hours. So I guess I'll touch on a couple of key points which I found recently in my research. So a couple of things. I think there's, number one, I think there's assumed, as I say, there's assumed benefits, but actually they have to be much more conscientious. And in my research, I typically see a society which fulfills human needs as one that can be seen as a successful society. So I take this kind of line of argument that a circular economy needs to fulfill the needs of its citizens and wider stakeholders. And that kind of can push on to how businesses and policy sees it. I think in practice it means using different frameworks to identify where the kind of key pain points are, using different methodologies, understanding how circular businesses or different policies impact the system. And I guess on the simplest terms, identifying every time a decision is made, how does this impact the citizen? How does this impact the worker? How does this impact the wider community? So making every decision, whether it's an economic or an environmental decision, also linking that to the human impact.
Great, thank you so much. And on that note, and with that comment, I'll move on to the last panelist, last but not least. Also, as you mentioned, Rebecca, it's many of the developing countries have actually worked much more circular for a long time and have whole other systems for actually working circular. And I think that makes a perfect bridge to you, Siddharth Hande, because you are the CEO and founder of Kabadiwalla Connect. You've developed your business around a supply chain method that leverages and supports the informal sector and eliminates efficiencies. So please tell us more about your social enterprise and Kabadiwalla Connect and how the system actually works in India.
Sure. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm very happy to be here, and I think that everyone made some really, really interesting points. So I really resonate with a lot of these points of being really focused on the contextual element of the intervention, who's involved, they be et cetera. The need for inclusivity when you think of the circular economy discussion, I think is like very, very critical. For me personally, starting Kabadiwalla Connect as a social enterprise, my work actually, or my kind of idea began when I was in college, and we used to do these beach cleanups. So I live in Chennai, which is a city in South India. It's the 4th largest city. I think there's 8.5 million people or something who live here. I live very close to the beach, and you have so much trash kind of washing. So we started doing these beach cleanups every weekend, and we got a lot of folks to come in and kind of take material and like do this cleanup element. We felt amazing. But then we started to learn that when we took that material and put it in the garbage can, it was actually being sent to open dump sites, which are actually marshlands and have actually pristine environments that has just been taken over by the city to kind of put their material there. And the situation hasn't changed 10, 15 years ago. I mean, from when I started these cleanups, it's the same thing where the municipality's waste, kind of everything is just prioritized to the landfill. And even that is really expensive for the municipality to carry out. So when I was doing these bleach cleanups, I noticed waste pickers coming in and picking up certain kinds of material. And, from my lived experience, selling to their local scrap shop. In India, they're called Kabadiwallas, and actually in Indonesia, they're called lapaks. A lot of cities in the global south have these small scrap shops in the city that are material agnostic, buying recycling material because there's so much value in it for local processing and things like this. And so I had this idea of mapping the aggregators in this supply chain in Chennai. And fast forward like to 2015 or 2016, we won a grant to kind of do this first census mapping. My goal was really to map every aggregator, small and large, in Chennai. At the end of our survey, we found about 2,500 aggregators in the city of Chennai who were collecting about 130,000 tons of paper, plastic, glass. That's about 24% of what the city generates at that time. That's about $7-8 million of material sales. And it was there the kind of idea actually came in to build a social enterprise about really looking at how the waste picker works with the small scrap shop, how the small scrap shop works with the larger scrap shop, and really try to bring in kind of like a formal approach to integrating them holistically. So that was the kind of starting point, and we're very focused on the integration of informal infrastructure into the formal waste management system. So we're still a startup. We have some exciting proof of concepts, mainly in the B2B space in India and Indonesia. But yeah, we believe very strongly in the power of this essentially decentralized supply chain of waste pickers, small scrap shops, and larger scrap shops, becoming this main kind of facilitator of the recovery of municipal solid waste.
That sounds really amazing, and what a great what a great job and what a great enterprise. So what do you think that the Western world can actually learn from this approach, from the approach that you're working on, like from building this supply chain built around decentralization and a material movement? What do you think we can learn in the Western world?
I mean, I think that there's a fascinating situation where, so when you look at the informal economy, there's an OECD report that says 2 billion people actually work in the informal workforce, and 90% of them is in Asia. So I think on the one hand, we need to really look at informal first strategies, assuming that, so for example, like the circular economy really needs to look at the global flow of materials and who are the actors at the very low level. You can trace a direct line from a waste picker to kind of like a ocean, any brand that's claiming ocean bound plastic certification, right? And I think that we really need to look at all the way down or upstream for people really like creating a lot of value. So I think that that's one aspect. But I think that the fascinating thing about the informal waste supply chain as it exists in India, and I would dare say even in Indonesia, is that it's inherently very decentralized. You have a small scrap shop working with 10, 15 waste pickers. Local residents are going to this place. And stark contrast from these centralized waste collection strategies that you kind of see. And I think inherently it's because in the West, you've always externalized the cost of waste. There hasn't been any value. It's only in India where it's like, oh, that metal has value, that plastic has value. And even before like there was any formal signal from any place, people realized that there was value in this material. And even now, 24%, $7-8 million every year for these stakeholders. So I think that there's something to learn about the efficiencies that some of these informal stakeholders work in. There's terrible issues with health and safety and all of these things, but from a supply chain perspective, the way they've kind of organized themselves to collect material that is of very little value, I think there's a story there.
That's a very, very, very important point. And also, what do you think? So you also, as we spoke about earlier on, you also say like that you also need a different approach when you look into circular economy in developing countries. So what can you elaborate a bit more on this? Like what, as you already had touched a bit upon it, but what can you? Where do you see the massive potential of this circular economy to get everyone on board and get the developing countries involved, like in a bigger scale? Where do you see the big potential there?
I mean, I think there's an amazing story of really believing in the informal supply chain and treating them as like the champions of our local waste management strategies. I think that the work this becomes the language of technology transfer from the global west to the global south. I think that would miss the point completely, and I feel like that's also the main point of this discussion. So I feel for us to really collaborate on this aspect, I think that we need to kind of remove this kind of one-sided kind of discussion. Okay, circular economy is some amazing tech. Let's do this here. Let's do this there. But rather think of, okay, what are the strengths that we have? What are the circular economy strategies that are also already there in India? Like from antiquity, I think there's so many fascinating examples, and I think we really need to build a kind of we need to have the same starting point of what does it really mean. I think data is critical, as the panelists have spoken about. I think really thinking of the design element, like even the modeling component of what would this look like, I think is critical, and of course a multi-stakeholder approach.
Very nice. I like the data, the same starting point, and then the design element, and also looking across and actually start learning from each other and integrating each other in the debate. Very good points here. So I'll open up to the floor to all 5 of you, so we can also just have a shared debate here. So a more like broad, open question here. So what would you, in your opinion, broadly here, what should be the role of social inclusion? What role should social inclusion play in circular economy going forward in the future? Anyone who wants to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. I guess, social inclusion, it's such a big topic, right? And also circularity is such a big topic. And I think what we can conclude from these different presentations is that it's not, although the best solutions are maybe context related and local, I don't think there is, it's going to be the case that we're going to bring all production closer to home and we're going to lose all these international relationships and value change and collaboration. So I guess it depends very much on the scale you're looking at, on the situation you're looking at. But maybe I would like to refer to a topic that I'm definitely not a specialist on, but how we value products and materials is, I think, a very important topic, and also how we value the social aspects of that. I think we could say that the need to move to a circular economy is driven by, at least in our situation, our wealth. We consume way too much, we throw away way too much, and we can do that because we're super wealthy. To say that our wealth is also the reason, or our development is also the reason why we can move to a circular economy feels a little bit off, although I don't think we should step away from that responsibility. But the means that we have are at the same time also the biggest problem. And I was very interested in a report that I read about, I guess the report was written by X-Tax, and that analyzed the effect of a shift in taxes from labor to materials. And it analyzed also the effects for the developing countries, the countries that very often produce the products that we consume. And their conclusion, at least for now, is that if these taxes, I hope I'm quoting it right, but I can all recommend you to read the report. Maybe it can even be shared afterwards by the organization. That's a shift in taxes and a different way of valuing the products can really also help the current countries that produce our products to move into this circular economy. So it's not a matter, the solution is not necessarily into bringing production closer to home and leaving the producing countries, let's say in Asia, to themselves. No, there is this international solution for a circular economy that obviously should take into account also the social aspects. So I would like to point that out. And again, there are so many social challenges on so many different scales. In our case, the donut economy is helping us to be super aware of that, both the local situation as the international relationship we have by our consumption patterns.
Yeah, very good point. And let's definitely share that link to the report as well. Thank you for sharing, Salomé. I also know that Frenzi, you've been working also with eClay and circular economy on actually intertwining and connecting the first world countries and the developing countries in a much more social inclusive circular economy. And I would like to hear a little bit more about like how you're actually working on intertwining and actually connecting those two worlds. So can you please tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, okay, no problem. First of all, I want to say at Metabolic, we've been mostly known for our work in global north countries in Europe and North America. And it's also kind of a new field for us to research the needs and tools that cities in global south countries might need to implement their version of a circular economy. And we are doing this project together with eClay and circular economy to really understand better what the tools are in the network of eClay members. That these cities that don't have the same data availability and resources that maybe Amsterdam has, what they really would need. And what I found most interesting from talking to people from the eClay network and also the members of innovation ecosystems in, for example, Nairobi or Jakarta, is that I think we need to shift away from the idea that circular economy is an outcome in itself in those cities, but rather really find the co-benefits and the ways we can use the circular economy as a vehicle for other desired outcomes, such as climate change adaptation or economic well-being, or maybe waste issues and biodiversity issues. So what I think is important in the future working with those cities is that we need to find another framing for the circular economy, because with limited public resources, it's really important to showcase what are the benefits through which we can achieve with a circular economy. So it's not the circular economy in itself. That should not be the main focus of this. And the second kind of research insight that we got was that it's very important to finance and bring kind of capital towards the private innovation ecosystem, especially when there is a limited public resources or agenda connected to the issue. There are a lot of already existing innovations and businesses that work in similar fields, but sometimes these international funding schemes that are available maybe through venture capitalists don't really, it's kind of hard to speak the same language or to get those resources. And somehow we really need to also, as decentralize the system, bring capital to those organizations that know the context better than, for example, we do. So it's really about leapfrogging and helping small-scale actors in those cities to implement solutions that already exist.
Yes, that's a very, very interesting, and also looking into like that it should not be the goal or the outcome in itself. I think it's a really important point, but also the means to get there to solve greater challenges and more holistic challenges. So I also want to say that the floor is open now, also here in the room and also online for questions. Do we already have some questions? Then Panelists will choose one of the questions from the audience.
I can talk now. Thank you so much for very, very interesting aspects and presentations. I particularly noticed the agreement that circularity is not necessarily linked to social sustainability. And I thought that was quite interesting. One of the thoughts that came to my mind: what are the necessary push and pull factors that would in any way align social sustainability with a circular transitions for urban development? I know Sid has a lot of experience and opinions about that, but I was wondering whether some of you would have some recommendations.
So should we start with you, Sid?
Sure. I mean, thanks for the question. I think in my line of work, I think, especially in the recycling industry, we need kind of certification standards that really look upstream and really try to understand source, all of these kinds of things. I think digitalization is a really critical step. Like, can you imagine digitalizing 130,000 tons that is being sold by these, aggregators in Chennai? Once through that kind of process, you can unlock so much value and you can really do a lot. So I think that these are two things. But I also feel, at least in my sphere, I'm talking very specifically about waste management, the issue of ocean plastic, things like that. I think extended producer responsibility also is a key step. Yeah, happy to hear everyone else's thoughts.
So Salomé, yeah.
So what we are experiencing in Amsterdam, and I think in many other places where we try to do similar things, is that I think we need a new sort of assessment framework. I already mentioned it before. We need to start, let's say, officially valuing more things than just money and economic results. And it would really help if for the social aspects, we also have indicators or tools to measure that and to really bring it into the equation. Initially, we had economic indicators like the euro or BNP. For the sustainability part, we have volumes of material or CO2 impact, and people just love these simple quantified numbers. That gives them something to compare. And even though it's still not that easy to compare euros to a CO2 impact, we are, in my experience at least, we are missing this social indicator to really bring into the equation and to really put them all, make them equal, or not even equal. Maybe we should make social or ecological even more important than the economic effects, but that would really help for people to make decisions, because a solution or a decision is never purely social or never purely economic. It consists of all different factors, and you want tools, I guess, at some point to help people to make the right decisions, because the environment we work in and the cities we live in, they're so complex that we need help for people to make the choices that are on the table more transparent, and to really have a choice whether you make a social choice or ecological or economical or a nice combination of all of them. I think that would really help.
Definitely, very, very important input. And Frenzi, is that
I wanted to respond to that because I had a very similar thought to add to this. I think that tools, not only for every people like you and me, but also especially for people who are making big decisions where resources go, where money goes, financing specifically. We need to have the right assessment framework and tools to ensure the money goes where the highest social and ecological value is created outside of monetary value. So I think that there's already so much going on. And if we only use numbers to show where money should go, where risk is lowest, then we cannot achieve the outcomes that we do want to achieve. So I definitely agree with Salomé that this is one of the biggest needs that we need to tackle. And speaking of money, I think a big pull factor would definitely be to leverage private capital to fund the right projects that already exist and really help them grow. That is something that I think is super valuable moving forward.
Yes, definitely, most definitely. And Rebecca, do you have a...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess I echo the other two panelists just then, in that we're kind of stuck in this GDP growth-centric paradigm, and I think as long as we're ruled by that, social and ecological considerations are always going to be subordinate. So it's not necessarily about changing that system completely, because that's perhaps unrealistic in the short term at least, but considering how different metrics can be included. So as you said, there's not really a standalone widespread metric at least, but looking at, Bhutan has a national happiness index. looking at other non-financial quality of life indicators. And it's worth noting from the kind of social, from the well-being perspective, that there's a kind of threshold level of income where it's been kind of proven through studies that well-being and self-reported happiness does not increase. So again, that points to the need to move away from individualistic consumption as an indicator, which essentially is what GTP is, to moving towards metrics which include well-being, not focused on consumption. So yeah, it's a kind of we're stuck in the system at the moment, but it's about having more choices to assess well-being. And I think it'd be amazing, actually, like City of Amsterdam, whether you could start to experiment with this kind of thing at a smaller scale, because we need good practice examples to show politicians so that the change is made. We need kind of evidence that it can be done in a different way.
Definitely, yeah. And also, so that's a new initiative, a new experiment of how to actually include and co-develop these social indicators and put them highest on the list. So that's a job for you, Salomé, and the team there. Yeah, we look forward to follow that. And also, Karoline, how do you think about this? What is your thoughts around this?
Yeah, for me, I think I have a really different angle on this question and the whole topic, and I understood a little bit your question, Panelists, as how do we bring a social sustainability together with these ideas and tools that circularity offer us, and I think there's, for us, some architects, I think circularity is an amazing tool to tell a story, and by this also shift a value, as you say, Salomé. We can use these ideas behind circularity really effectively, as I said, to tell stories, and by this to create an identity for new places. For example, people feel really like, also to create places that you feel more that you belong to because you know what is happening behind you. And I think this whole idea of being connected to a place, to a product maybe, but also to your surroundings, to your people, is something that circularity can actually create this connectedness. And then I think sustainable society is for me very much about a healthy society, about social sustainability is about diversity, and social sustainability is about knowing where you come from and feeling like that you belong somewhere, that you have a role, and that everybody and everything is needed. And I think then by looking into nature, and me as a landscape architect, I'm very much inspired by nature, and it's my daily tool. I think nature offers a super great variety of possibilities and inspirations in that. For example, when I say, like in nature, waste actually doesn't exist. For example, it was a big topic here, waste, and in nature everything has a function. And for example, if I take a leaf, it creates shadow and cooling, it creates oxygen, and it's food for us and animals. And when it falls down on the ground, then it's not waste. It actually is again nutrition, and it's being transformed into soil, and is something for it's food for the tree. So there is some kind of circular models in that, and that is super interesting. I think there's a lot of things in nature we can learn that directly have an impact on us and society, and nature only works in circles. And that's maybe a totally different angle, but that's what came up to my mind when you asked these questions. And I think these two things, circularity and social sustainability, are for me very closely linked. We just have to make this story more public accessible and more create an awareness around this, I think. Because I think we're living in a time where people are looking for this, what is the meaning behind everything, and and need to be connected. Yeah,
that's a great input. Also, looking at nature creates not doesn't create waste. I think that's a brilliant point. And also looking into the El Magatha, newly published El Magatha report, also connecting the importance of circularity with biodiversity, and actually, enforcing nature has an important role to play in the circular economy as well.
Yeah.
So I think you touched upon a really important thing here, and also building on those stories and telling new stories. And I was curious about if you have some, so like when you talk about like the neighborhoods and when you know that you have succeeded with creating a socially inclusive and diverse neighborhood, do you have those kind of social indicators that you measure when you see like now you have like at least maybe not a completely done neighborhood, but at least a well-functioning and active neighborhood? Could we learn from some of your social indicators looking at like a neighborhood scale for looking at a much more like overall structure? What kind of social indicators are you working with in your projects?
Yeah, I think I wish I had numbers or something, but we rarely work with numbers in our indicators. In that sense, we often work with emotions and something that we see and feel directly. And maybe an example also from the Northern Harbour here, Nordhavn. When we were in the development process, we really strongly believe that the connection to the water is an essential part of this neighborhood. And we designed a big wooden deck that is leading down to the water, and made a collage, like a 3D image of it, with a lot of people in it. And and our client says, you architects and your unrealistic images, it's way too many people, we will never have so many people here. And when you look at it now, the area is called Sandkaj. It became an attraction for whole Copenhagen.
Yeah.
So it is actually like even the neighbors complaining about too much noise, too many people, and it's an extremely successful development we made there, which is not housing and building mass. It is the public space. And I'm not sure if this answers your question, but I think we had a very good intuition and very good arguments on saying, we need the connection to the water here. This is what people want. They want to go swimming. We're in the North Harbour. It's part of the story here, and a part also of a new story of Copenhagen, that the water is so clean that you can swim here. And then it becomes this attractive area for all of the city, where people now coming from Østerbro, Nørrebro to really go and swim there. And I think reflecting on projects like this and taking this further to other projects, it's maybe something we work with. It's a constant learning process.
Yeah.
But there's not certain indicators where I can see do this and this and this. But again, it was also a little bit this context-based analysis, like looking at where do we have harbor baths in Copenhagen, and could, for example, a bath there also be something. Yeah.
But it's a point in itself, right? That it doesn't have to be like a measurable or numbers, but it's an intuition, and that's like looking around and see, does it work? Does it function? Do we have an active city life? Yeah. So like that's other kinds of not like counting head numbers, but more like saying, what do we see? What do we actually experience? So I think that's a point in itself.
Also reflecting on yourself.
Yeah.
How do you live, and how do you wish your future for yourself, but also for your children or whoever you want to look like. And for example, clean water and swimming, and here in Copenhagen is such an amazing quality that I could not imagine not to have that.
Yeah, it's a big privilege. So I don't know if we have time for a last question, or are we? We're running out of time. I'm just hearing. I haven't seen any waving hands here in the room, but listening, very aware, with a big awareness here. So very good to have you all here in the studio with us physically, and so good to have you online as well. And first of all, thank you so much, Salomé, Frenzi, Rebecca, Sid, Karoline. And it's been a real pleasure to have you here and to enlighten us here today on the very broad aspects of social inclusion and circular economy. I've personally learned a lot, and I hope it's been valuable for all of you here and all of you online as well. So thank you, everyone. And one last thing that I just need to say is that we would love to have your feedback. So here in the room, we have some feedback notes here on the tables. And online, we will post a link for you to fill out. So please, we would really valuable your feedback on the debate. And or else I just would like to just give a big applause and a big thank you to all of you. And it's been a true pleasure.